Hello there, and welcome. I'm so glad you made it. Maybe it's been a long day. Maybe your mind is still turning, looking for something to settle into. Or maybe you're simply the kind of person who sleeps better when the night is filled with quiet wonder. However you arrived, this space is for you. You don't need to think too hard. You don't need to figure anything out. All you have to do now is breathe and listen. Let your body grow light. Let your thoughts become slow. Let the stillness take you. Tonight, we're heading somewhere dusty and distant. Somewhere familiar in name, but stranger than most imagine. A frozen desert of forgotten oceans, ghost volcanoes, and swirling red dust. A world that once may have bloomed and might bloom again. Tonight, we're going to Mars. Not the Mars of fiction, but the real one, the mysterious one. The one that spins quietly just a few worlds away, keeping its secrets under rust and silence. You're not here to conquer it. You're here to explore it softly, one quiet fact at a time. Let your mind follow the orbit. Let the night unfold. And while you're settling in, before your eyes grow too heavy, I'd love it if you gently tapped subscribe or pressed the little hype button YouTube recently added. It's a small click, but it helps keep these experiments and explorations orbiting out into the algorithm. You can also leave a comment telling me where you're listening from and what time it is in your corner of the night. It's oddly fascinating to see where people are drifting off with us, scattered across the world, like stars across the galaxy. Now take a deep breath. Let your day drift away, and let's travel together into the quiet corners of the universe. Mars had oceans once. Wide and restless, they rolled across the planet's northern hemisphere, filling basins the size of continents and lapping against highland shores now dry and wind-scoured. For millions of years, they moved beneath the same sun we know today, catching its light, throwing it back in glints of motion and memory. Today, those waters are gone, but their absence has not erased their presence. You can still trace the faint outlines of coastlines, the long, curling shapes of river deltas, the braided networks of ancient valleys where liquid once ran. These are not speculative scars. They are carved into the surface like the ghost of a world that almost was. Orbital imagery reveals channels that stretch for hundreds of kilometers, some wider than the Mississippi, some deeper than the Grand Canyon. Their paths are not the random markings of wind or tectonics. They meander, split, rejoin. They flood into basins and pool into vanished lakes. To walk along them, if you could, would be to trace the edge of a forgotten sea, one that once shimmered beneath an alien sky. There are signs of rainfall too, or something like it. Impact craters softened and warped by erosion. Crater rims broken open where water overflowed and carved an exit channel. Rivulets etched into the sides of ancient hills, as if by persistent drizzles or sudden storms. Scientists call these features valley networks, but they look like memories, worn in gently, over time, by something persistent, something that moved with gravity and spread with patience. Not wind, not ice, liquid water. Long ago, Mars had the conditions to hold it: a thicker atmosphere, warmer temperatures, maybe even clouds. Maybe even rain that fell in sheets and ran down dusty slopes to gather in hollows, to feed lakes that rippled and steamed and dried in seasons. Some valleys begin in no particular place, as though the water rose from underground, bursting from aquifers or volcanic heat, joining the surface like a memory rising to consciousness. Other valleys collect in branching patterns, fractal and organic, the unmistakable shape of flow. And where water flows, life sometimes follows. That's the undercurrent of all these Martian truths. The gentle, whispered question beneath every image, every measurement. If there were oceans, lakes, rivers, rain, was there anything in them? Anything that swam? Or something smaller, microbial, ancient, holding on to warmth in the cracks between stones? We don't know. But the possibility lingers, quiet and unprovable, like a story half remembered in a language we no longer speak. The northern hemisphere of Mars, smoother and lower than the rest, may have once been an ocean basin. Its surface tells fewer stories of violent impacts, not because none occurred, but because the water may have erased them, smoothed them out like wind smoothing sand. Some features resemble ancient shorelines, curving with gentle consistency across the divide between highlands and lowlands. Others rise like marine terraces, stepped and faint, the possible remnants of waves lapping at the edge of something vast. But that world is not the one we see now. Today, Mars is cold. Its air is thin, barely a whisper compared to Earth's. Water cannot remain in liquid form at the surface for long. It either freezes or boils away, and yet the evidence remains, preserved in the stillness, not just in pictures from orbit, but in the dust itself. Mars did not forget. It just fell quiet. The planet's tilt and orbit may have changed over time, shifting climates and redistributing sunlight. Volcanoes may have thickened the air, and then stilled. Magnetic fields collapsed. The atmosphere thinned, stolen by solar wind, stripped away slowly, invisibly, over aeons. Without it, the warmth bled out. The oceans dried, sank, froze. Some escaped into space. The rest may remain, locked in polar ice or hidden underground, waiting in silence. Mars didn't die all at once. It faded. And as it did, the seas that once moved across its face receded into myth. Rovers have found rounded pebbles, smoothed by ancient water. Sedimentary layers, laid down gently over time, stacked like pages in a lost book. Hematite spheres, nicknamed blueberries, formed in the presence of water. Clays and sulfates, minerals that only make sense in wet environments. These aren't guesses. They are the chemistry of wetness, fossilized in rock. You can stand a robot on the ground, drill into the soil, and read a story written 3 billion years ago, in nothing but silence and stone. And in some places, the erosion is so soft, so delicate, that it could only have happened underwater, under calm, standing pools, not floods, not chaos, just stillness, like a pond waiting for something to stir its surface. Sometimes the facts are overwhelming. Mars once had enough water to cover the entire planet in a shallow ocean more than 100 meters deep. But it didn't spread evenly. It pooled in lowlands. It formed lakes and seas. It carved rivers and streams. And then, over time, it left. But its absence is not empty. We live in a solar system full of water, ice rings around Saturn, subsurface oceans on Europa and Enceladus, vapor jets from distant moons. But Mars is different. It is a place where water ran freely across the land, not hidden, not buried, not encased in shells of ice, but flowing, visible, active. It is the only planet besides Earth where we can point to a landscape and say, here, water moved here, life might have begun here. And then, something changed. We do not know exactly when, or how quickly, or whether it might happen again. But we know this. Mars remembers. Its memory is written in valleys, etched in layers, preserved in chemical signatures and geological size. You don't need imagination to believe it once held oceans. Just patience, just curiosity, just the willingness to listen to a world that speaks only in echoes. Mars had oceans once. Now it has silence. But that silence is not empty. It's full of shape, of structure, of absence with meaning, like the dry bed of a lake, still remembering its shoreline, like a memory carried not in words, but in terrain. The planet is dry now, but the story is not. Mars is leaking. Not water, not light, but air. Quietly, invisibly, the planet's atmosphere is being stolen. There are no storms you can see, no howling winds at the edge of the horizon, but the loss is steady and real. Every second, atoms drift upward, unbound by pressure or protection, and vanish into space. It has been happening for billions of years, a slow unraveling that stripped the planet bare. What was once a thicker, warmer sky is now a fragile whisper, too thin to breathe, too light to hold back the cold. Long ago, Mars likely had an atmosphere dense enough to support rain, rivers, maybe even seas, a blanket of gas that wrapped around the planet, held in place by gravity and sealed in by a magnetic field that shielded it from the raw solar wind. That field is gone now, and with it, the atmosphere's defenses, the solar wind, a stream of high-energy particles from the sunday, flows outward constantly like a tide of invisible fire. On Earth, our magnetic field deflects it, protecting our air, our oceans, our lungs. But Mars lost that field long ago, and the wind came in. It didn't arrive in waves of violence. It didn't need to. The process is slow, persistent, like erosion or breath. Charged particles from the sun slam into the upper reaches of the Martian atmosphere, energizing atoms, heating them until they slip free. Bit by bit, the sky loosens its grip. Atoms of oxygen and carbon drift upward, accelerated by forces we can't see, until they reach escape velocity and leave Mars behind. There's no sound, no light, no scar, just atoms, lifting into the black. This wasn't always the case. Evidence suggests Mars once had a magnetic field, generated by a molten, churning core, much like Earth's. But something changed. The core cooled or slowed, and the magnetic field collapsed. Without that invisible shield, the solar wind had a clear path to the atmosphere. It didn't tear it away all at once. It simply began to push, and it never stopped. Today, the Martian atmosphere is less than 1% the thickness of Earth's. You couldn't breathe it. You couldn't even feel it. Stand on the surface without a suit, and your lungs would find no air, your blood no pressure. The sky is not gone, but it is fading. What remains is cold and thin, made mostly of carbon dioxide, laced with traces of argon and nitrogen, held in place not by strength but inertia. And even that is slowly disappearing. To understand this loss, scientists sent a spacecraft to listen, not to sound, but to data, to the silent chemistry of vanishing molecules. MAVEN, the Mars Atmosphere and Volatile Evolution mission, arrived in 2014, and since then it has circled the planet, watching the atmosphere escape. Its instruments trace particles as they lift and leave, mapping the invisible, measuring the theft. It confirmed what many suspected. The solar wind is the culprit. Not a violent thief, but a patient one. MAVEN has seen how solar storms increase the loss. When the sun flares, the stream intensifies. Charged particles slam harder into the upper atmosphere, stripping away atoms in greater numbers. During these storms, Mars loses air faster, like a house in a strong wind, shedding shingles, bits of insulation, scraps of memory. It is a reminder that space is not still, the sun is not gentle, and planets are not permanent. But MAVEN saw something else too, a pattern, a rhythm in the loss. It's not entirely chaotic. There are zones where the air escapes more easily, shaped by the planet's magnetic crust, fragments of its long-dead global field. These magnetic fossils still cling to the surface in patches, creating local defenses. Like the remnants of a broken umbrella, they offer small shelters where particles hold on longer, but around them, the escape continues. This is not the kind of change we notice in days or even years. The transformation of Mars happened across eons, billions of years ago. When the atmosphere was thicker, the planet may have been warmer. Liquid water could flow and stay. Rain could fall. But as the atmosphere thinned, the surface cooled, the pressure dropped, and the conditions for life, if they ever existed, collapsed. The seas froze or evaporated, the rivers dried, the sky became fragile. Even today, the loss continues, a whisper of gas, drifting upward, a few grams every second, but over time, it adds up. enough to change the weather, enough to end an era, enough to strip a planet of its voice. What Maven helps us see is not just the history of Mars, but the fragility of planetary balance. How a field of invisible force can hold life in place or let it slip away. How a planet can carry oceans and air and then, through nothing more than time and sunlight, lose them both. Sometimes, people ask if we could give Mars its atmosphere back, terraform it, thicken the sky, warm the ground. There are theories, calculations, wild hopes, but even if we could do all that, the sun remains, the wind remains, and the field that once protected the planet is still gone. Without it, any new sky would begin to vanish again. Slowly, quietly, persistently. Mars is not broken. It is simply unguarded. Its air is not absent. It is leaving. Not with a crash, but with a sigh. And if you stand still long enough, you might imagine you can feel it. The trace of atoms brushing past, the silent wind above the red dust, the breath of a planet slowly exhaling into space. The Martian sky is not what it seems. By day, it glows with a muted rust, a pale orange veil stretching overhead, soft and strange beneath the sun's cold stare. The light is scattered, not by clouds or warmth, but by the endless dance of dust. Fine iron-rich particles suspended in the thin atmosphere, turning sunlight into the color of memory. From the surface, it looks like the entire planet is caught inside a lantern. But wait until sunset. Wait until the sun slips toward the horizon and everything changes. Because on Mars, twilight is inverted. The day is red, but the dusk is blue. It's one of the planet's most beautiful contradictions. As the sun lowers, the dusty sky begins to soften. The familiar orange fades from the horizon, replaced by a soft bluish glow that gathers around the dying light. It starts small, a haze around the sun, but then it spreads, reaching upward like breath on glass. The sky does not go dark all at once. It shifts, it cools, and for a few quiet minutes, Mars glows blue. The reason lies in the way light moves through air. On Earth, our thick atmosphere scatters the shorter blue wavelengths of sunlight more effectively, sending them in all directions, which is why our daytime sky is blue. As the sun sets, that blue light is filtered out by the long path through the atmosphere, leaving behind the reds and golds that paint our evenings. But on Mars, the rules are reversed. The atmosphere is thinner, and the dust is everywhere. A fine iron-laced powder that absorbs blue light and lets the longer red wavelengths pass. So during the day, Mars is bathed in reddish hues. But at sunset, something delicate happens. The light from the sun has to travel through more of that dusty air, a longer, slanted path across the horizon. And in that stretch, the Martian dust begins to scatter light forward, directly toward the observer. Unlike Earth's atmosphere, which diffuses blue light outward in all directions, the dust on Mars scatters blue light inward into your eyes. The blue isn't strong, but it's focused, concentrated, wrapped around the sun like a halo. If you were standing there, you wouldn't believe it. A sky that glowed dull red all day would, for just a while, cool into blues and silvers, the opposite of everything you've seen. The kind of reversal that feels less like science and more like dreaming. The red planet, blushing blue at the edges. Mars doesn't have clouds the way Earth does. No thick cumulus drifting overhead. No silver linings or sudden bursts of light. But it has high, wispy streaks of ice crystal, sometimes seen just after dark. And in those blue twilights, they shimmer faintly. The sun's rays, bent and broken by particles and frost, scatter into subtle gradients of light, hints of violet and steel that drift over the horizon like whispers. And then, just as gently as it arrived, the blue fades. The night on Mars comes cold and fast. The atmosphere, too thin to hold heat, lets warmth bleed away almost instantly. Temperatures drop by dozens of degrees in a single hour. The color drains from the sky, and a deeper darkness takes its place. Stars appear quickly, not in twos and threes, but by the hundreds. There's no moisture in the air to obscure them, no light pollution, just silence and clarity and sky. But that moment before the dark, that quiet glow of blue around the falling Sunday, is like a secret the planet offers only at the end of the day, a brief inversion, a bending of expectation, a reminder that even familiar light behaves differently in unfamiliar air. The rovers have seen it: spirit and opportunity, curiosity and perseverance. They've all watched sunsets through robotic eyes. They've captured images of that blue dusk, relayed them back across millions of kilometers. And when we see them, those hazy Martian evenings, it stirs something, because it feels like home and not home all at once. A world that echoes our own, but turns everything sideways. We expect red, we prepare for red, but at the edges of the day, Mars becomes something else, something quieter, something softer. And if you were standing there, you might not even notice at first. The color shift isn't loud. It doesn't flare or burn. It emerges slowly, like breath spreading in cold air. And as the sun dips lower, you'd see the blue gather, not across the whole sky, but around the source. A bullseye of cool light wrapped around a fading fire. You wouldn't find it anywhere else. It's not the kind of sunset that ends with applause. It's the kind that invites stillness, the kind that asks you to linger. Even the sky seems to slow. There is no sound, no wind, usually. Just the crunch of dust underfoot, the stillness of a world not in a hurry. You could stretch out your hand toward the horizon, and the blue would seem almost close enough to touch. But it's light, not distance, dust, not depth. And just like that, it's gone. Night on Mars is total, but the memory of that sky remains. A planet known for fire and rust, caught for a moment in quiet frost. A world painted in opposites. A sky turned inward, a sunset that whispers in blue. There is a mountain on Mars so large, so impossibly wide and tall, that it bends with the curve of the planet. From its base, you cannot see its summit. Not because of clouds, but because the mountain itself stretches beyond the horizon. It is called Olympus Mons, and it is the largest volcano in the solar system. Taller than 3 Everests stacked end to end, it rises more than 22 kilometers into the thin Martian air, a slow and massive swell in the land that once moved with fire. But now, it sleeps. It has slept for a very long time. Olympus Mons is not sharp like Earth's volcanic peaks. It doesn't rise in jagged cliffs or end in craters broken by eruptions. Instead, it is smooth, broad, a gentle dome that rises like a breath held for centuries. Its base spans over 600 kilometers, wider than the entire state of Arizona, and its slopes are shallow, stretching for hundreds of kilometers outward in every direction. You could stand on the side of this volcano and not even realize you were on a mountain. The ascent is so gradual, so enormous in scale, that your sense of height would dissolve into the distance. The summit, when you finally reached it, would feel like a plain, a plateau, broad and wind-carved, dotted with calderas. Massive depressions formed when the volcano collapsed inward after eruptions. Some of these calderas are over 80 kilometers wide. Standing at their edge, you might feel as though you were looking into a shallow sea drained of water, a quiet basin where nothing moves. The silence up there would be absolute. No wind, no trees, no birds. Just the faint whistle of air too thin to carry much sound, and the memory of fire etched into stone. Once, Olympus Mons was alive. It erupted not in violent bursts, but in long, slow flows of lava that crept across the land like glowing rivers. The low gravity of Mars and the lack of plate tectonics allowed this volcano to build and build, layer after layer, without interruption. On Earth, volcanic hotspots shift as tectonic plates move above them, creating chains of islands or ranges. But on Mars, the crust is still, stationary, The heat below pushes upward in the same spot, and so Olympus Mons grew and grew and grew for millions of years. Its flanks are marked by lava channels and collapse scars. Landslides, some stretching for hundreds of kilometers, broke away from the edges and slid into the surrounding plains. The mountain is not only massive, but heavy, and the crust beneath it has buckled under the strain. Around its base are cliffs and ridges, steep escarpments called aureole deposits, formed when enormous chunks of the volcano's sides gave way. These are scars left behind by motion. Even in stillness, the mountain has shaped the land around it. And yet now, it is quiet. There is no heat, no glowing vents, no signs of recent eruption. The surface is cold, hardened, covered in dust. The last known eruptions may have occurred tens of millions of years ago, or perhaps more recently. We're still not sure. Some lava flows appear young, geologically speaking, smooth, uncratered, barely weathered. If Olympus Mons is extinct, then it died not long ago. If it is dormant, then its sleep has been long and deep. You might expect a mountain so vast to feel intimidating, but there's something oddly serene about Olympus Mons. It doesn't loom. It expands. It doesn't pierce the sky. It holds it, gently, like a hand stretched toward space. And because of the thin atmosphere, the summit rises far above the level where clouds could form or wind could roar. It sits in stillness, in isolation, a summit above the weather. If you could stand on its peak, you'd be above most of the Martian air. The horizon would curve around you, a red arc against the blackness of space. The sun would appear slightly smaller than it does on Earth, but still bright, still sharp. And around you, silence. A silence so deep it would feel physical. You could shout, and the sound would vanish in your helmet. You could listen and hear only your breath. The mountain would not answer. Olympus Mons is a monument to what Mars once was. Hot, active, moving. It is a fossil of force, a relic of geologic ambition. It is too large for any one person to see in full, too wide for photographs to capture all at once, too ancient for memory. But it remains, a testament carved not in fire, but in patience. There is something humbling about its size, but also something comforting. The mountain is not angry, it is not broken, it is whole, unhurried. It has outlived storms and seasons, dust and discovery. Rovers will never climb it. It's too vast. Satellites can only scan its features from above, collecting details like puzzle pieces from a landscape too big to hold. But the mountain is there. It waits. It doesn't need witnesses. And perhaps that's the strange beauty of it, that something so immense can exist with such quiet, that a volcano once capable of reshaping continents now sleeps without sound, that its legacy is not just in height or volume, but in the peace it keeps. Olympus Mons is not a threat. It is a memory made of stone. Not every wonder burns. Some simply remain. Mars has 2 moons, but they are not like ours. They are small, misshapen things, dark, quiet, and strangely shy. Not perfect circles or gleaming spheres, but irregular, jagged fragments that look more like drifting rubble than companions of a planet. They are called Phobos and Deimos, names drawn from the twin sons of Ares, the Greek god of war, fear, and panic, riding just ahead of their father into battle. It fits. They are shadows, really, shards of something larger, maybe never whole to begin with. They orbit fast and close and lopsided, always on the edge of vanishing. Phobos is the larger of the two, though not by much. Just over 22 kilometers across at its widest point, it's about the size of a small city. Deimos is smaller still, barely 12 kilometers long, and smoother, more distant. Both are coated in dust and pockmarked with craters, the scars of a long, lonely journey through space. They do not shine. Their surfaces are dark, reflecting only a small fraction of the weak sunlight that reaches them. From the surface of Mars, they would appear as fast-moving pinpricks, racing across the sky like anxious thoughts. Phobos orbits so close to Mars, only about 6,000 kilometers above the surface, that it circles the planet faster than Mars rotates. It rises in the west and sets in the east, completing a full loop in just over 7 hours. If you stood on Mars, you'd see it dart overhead twice in a single day, like a restless bird, always returning. Deimos, farther out, moves more slowly, rising in the east and setting in the west, like Earth's moon, but taking nearly 3 Martian days to complete one orbit. It's more like a quiet echo than a presence, subtle, almost mist. No one is entirely sure where they came from. They don't behave like moons born from the same material as their planet. Their shapes are too irregular, their densities too low. They resemble asteroids more than natural satellites, and many scientists believe they were once wandering rocks, objects from the asteroid belt or beyond, that Mars caught in its gravity long ago. But even that theory is complicated. Capturing something into a stable orbit is not easy. It requires energy to be lost, momentum to be bled away, and Mars is not massive enough to do it casually. Some think Phobos and Deimos might be pieces of something else, a larger moon shattered by impact, or debris flung into orbit by a violent collision billions of years ago, slowly merging into the moons we see now. Their surfaces offer no definitive answers, only hints, grooves and cracks, layers of dust, impact scars that reach deep and wide. Phobos, in particular, carries strange lines etched into its body, like stretch marks or fractures waiting to spread. And Phobos is dying, not quickly, but measurably. Each year, it drifts closer to Mars by about 2 centimeters. It's being pulled in, slowly but surely, by tidal forces, gravitational tugs that distort and bend it, drawing it downward with every pass. At this rate, in tens of millions of years, Phobos will reach a breaking point. It may crash into the planet, shattering into a storm of debris, or more likely, it will be torn apart by gravity before it gets that far, forming a thin, fragile ring around Mars, a temporary adornment, a brief second act. Imagine that. A ringed Mars, the red planet circled by the remnants of its own moon, dust and rock casting shadows across the atmosphere, light filtered through fragments of what once was. But for now, Phobos remains intact, cracked, aging, inching downward, but still whole, still orbiting, still returning. Deimos, more distant, is stable for now. It may escape entirely one day, slowly drifting away into space, but it shows no urgency. It lingers on the edge of gravity's reach, quiet and loyal. Its orbit is almost circular, its motion almost calm. If Phobos is panic, then Deimos is fear at rest, a quieter dread, the kind that stays long after the moment has passed. If you could stand on Mars and look up at the sky, you'd see them both, small, fast, strange. You'd notice how Phobos moves too quickly, racing overhead in a blur, casting fleeting shadows on the ground during eclipses. Deimos would move slowly, barely visible, a dim point of light that never quite commands attention. Unlike our moon, they do not light the night. They do not pull tides or inspire poems. But they are there, patient and peculiar, reminders that even planets have secrets orbiting them. These moons do not behave as expected. They do not follow the rules of elegance or symmetry, but they persist. And in their persistence is a kind of wonder. They are not grand, but they are ancient. They have survived impacts, erosion, gravitational shifts. They have seen Mars change, lose its oceans, thin its skies, bury its rivers. And through it all, they have continued to orbit. Fast, slow, restless, waiting. The future of Phobos is sealed. The countdown is slow, but certain. A moon falling toward its end, drawn not by violence, but by inevitability. A silent descent, stretched across epochs, And Deimos? Deimos watches from a distance, watches its sibling spiral inward, watches the planet below, dry and still, holding on to memories that no longer have weight. Mars has 2 moons. They do not shine, they do not roar, but they endure, and they fall. There are storms on Mars that do not crack or roar. No lightning splits the sky, no thunder rolls across the plains. But they are vast, they are relentless, and they can consume an entire planet. These are not storms of water or wind in the way we know them. They are storms of dust, fine, rust-colored particles lifted from the surface and spread across thousands of kilometers, moving not with violence, but with patience. The kind of patience that builds and builds until the sky disappears. It begins small, a swirl of dust kicked up by changing temperatures near the equator. Mars does not have oceans, but it still has seasons, shaped by the tilt of its axis and the length of its year. As sunlight shifts from one hemisphere to the other, heat rises unevenly from the surface. In some places, it lifts into the thin air and creates movement, currents, pressure differences, and then motion. What starts as a whisper of wind becomes a wall of dust, not sharp or sudden, but slow and spreading. The way fog might roll in, only heavier, drier, redder. The dust itself is incredibly fine, powdered rock from eons of impacts and erosion, ground down by the freeze-thaw of Martian days and nights. It doesn't settle quickly. Once it's lifted, it lingers, clinging to the air, scattering light, turning the sky into a dim, orange glow. During small storms, this haze remains local, blanketing a region, muting the sun, but sometimes the storm doesn't stop. Sometimes it spreads, feeding on its own motion. It wraps around the planet like a second skin, a veil of suspended earth that lasts for weeks or even months. A global dust storm. Imagine it, standing on the surface of Mars and watching the sky darken. Not quickly, not like dusk, but gradually, as though the world is being erased from above. The sun becomes a disk behind gauze. Shadows vanish. Horizons blur. The air does not howl. There is no roar of debris. The atmosphere is too thin for that kind of sound. Even as the wind moves, it moves without voice. Just particles, lifted and carried, grinding invisibly across the land. The temperature begins to drop. Without sunlight, the ground cannot hold its warmth. Day becomes dim, and night becomes colder still. Solar panels grow dull with settling dust. Batteries drain, eyes shut, rovers fall silent. One by one, the machines we've sent go blind beneath the storm. Even those designed to survive, to wait out the darkness, must conserve energy, retreat into hibernation, and sometimes they do not wake again. In 2018, a global dust storm swallowed Mars. It lasted for weeks, wrapping the entire planet in haze. The Opportunity rover, which had explored the surface for over 14 years, went quiet during that storm. It was built to sleep during weather like this, to shut down and wait for sunlight to return. But the dust was thick. The days grew long, and Opportunity never called home again. When the skies finally cleared, it remained still, a machine outlived by the storm it could not see. What's strange is how little it takes to begin. On Earth, storms need moisture, rising heat, complex patterns of pressure and energy. On Mars, all it takes is sunlight and dust. The heat from the sun stirs the ground, and the ground responds with a whisper of movement. That whisper grows, and because there's no rain to settle it, no dense air to resist it, the dust rises higher, spreads farther, moves with ease, and once it reaches the upper atmosphere, it can circle the planet in days. There is beauty in it, if you're far enough away. From orbit, the dust storms resemble soft clouds, curling over craters and plains, brushing against mountains, flowing through canyons like liquid light. They do not flash or churn, but they move. You can watch them stretch and fade, billow and reform, breathing across the red surface like tides of powdered fire. From space, they are hypnotic. But on the ground, they are silence made visible. There are no birds to scatter, no leaves to rustle. The dust rises without music. It floats, it falls, it lingers. There is no sound, only motion. It gets into every crack, clings to every surface. It is not hostile. It is simply there, unavoidable, slow, complete. And when it ends, when the storm has spent itself, when the winds calm and the sun begins to pierce the sky again, the landscape is different. Not transformed in shape, but in tone. Everything is a little softer, a little more buried. Tracks disappear, landmarks dull. The dust is not just above, it becomes part of the ground again. A thin layer of red memory settling back onto the skin of the planet. Mars does not roar when it's angry. It does not scream when it storms. It covers, it hides, it waits. And in that waiting, there is something solemn, a storm without thunder, a silence that travels, a sky that forgets the light. Beneath the frozen crust of Mars, beneath layers of dust and silence and time, there is still water. Not rivers that run, not oceans that dance with waves and tides, but hidden reservoirs, salty, unmoving, cold. They do not glimmer in sunlight or flow across valleys. They do not trickle or shimmer. They lie beneath the surface, still and secret, cloaked in ice and ancient cold. And yet, they are there, not gone, not dried, simply waiting. Near the south pole of Mars, the surface is wrapped in a thick cap of ice. Frozen carbon dioxide and water layered together, pressed into strata by long winters and quiet millennia. For a long time, it was thought to be solid all the way through, a frozen monument to a planet that had lost its warmth. But in 2018, radar echoes from the European Space Agency's Mars Express orbiter told a different story. Beneath that ice, more than a kilometer down, the signal changed. It bounced in a way that suggested something smoother, more reflective, something liquid, a lake, or maybe more than one. It's not the kind of lake we know. This is no alpine basin, no crystalline spring fed by mountain snow. This is water saturated with salt, dense and briny, heavy enough to resist freezing, even in the cold Martian underground. Temperatures down there might drop far below the freezing point of pure water, but salt changes things. Salt makes water strange. It lets it survive where it shouldn't. It holds it in suspension, like a thought that never quite leaves. The idea of liquid water on Mars, now, in the present, is both comforting and eerie. Comforting, because it means the planet isn't entirely dry. Eerie, because it means something moves where we cannot see. Something persists in the dark, beneath miles of silent frost. We don't know how big these lakes are, or how many there might be. We don't know if they're connected, or stagnant, or alive in ways we cannot yet measure. All we know is that something is there, hidden under a crust of ancient ice, humming softly in the radar. It's strange to imagine water without movement, stillness without silence. These lakes do not ripple. They do not freeze, but they do not flow either. They sit. They endure. They are relics of a world that once knew rain and riverbanks, evaporation and erosion. A world that may have cradled life in warm pools beneath a thicker sky. That Mars is gone, but its traces remain. Etched in the valleys, preserved in mineral salts, and now perhaps resting below the southern cap, like a heart that forgot how to beat. There is something lonely about them, these buried seas. They do not announce themselves. They do not rise or speak or spill. They lie beneath kilometers of pressure, in darkness no sunlight can reach. And yet, they remain. For how long, no one knows. They may have been there for millions of years. They may disappear tomorrow. But for now, they exist. Not gone, just sleeping. We do not know what waits inside them. Mars is a sterile world on the surface, bombarded by radiation, swept by wind, stripped of magnetism and warmth. But below, in those salty depths, the story might be different. On Earth, life has been found in the most extreme environments. Organisms that live in Antarctic lakes buried beneath glaciers, microbes that thrive in brine sealed off from the sun for thousands of years. They do not need much. Not light, not warmth, just chemistry. Just the right minerals and the time to evolve. Could something like that exist here? Not fish, not movement, but microbes. Simple life, ancient or ongoing. Silent passengers in a reservoir untouched since the sky collapsed and the rivers froze. It's a question science hasn't answered yet. Our machines can detect the shadows of water, the reflections, the anomalies. But to know what truly rests beneath the ice, we would have to go there. Drill, reach, touch. And even then, the story might be one of absence. No motion, no cells, just water in waiting. Still, the idea persists, because water is more than a substance. It is a memory, a promise, a link between what was and what might be. On Earth, where there is water, there is life. And even though Mars is not Earth, even though it has traveled a colder, harsher path, the presence of water, even hidden, feels like a thread tying it to us. The search for it has been long. We once thought Mars was covered in canals, lined with vegetation, pulsing with seasons. Then we discovered it was dry, empty. But over time, that emptiness softened. We found signs of past rivers, ancient deltas, gullies that may still shift in the warmer months. Then we found ice, and now perhaps lakes, each discovery a whisper, each layer a reminder that Mars is not dead. It is veiled. Water does not announce itself on this planet. It hides, beneath rocks, beneath dust, beneath time, but it is there, and maybe that is enough. For now, to know that not everything has vanished, that not everything has dried and cracked beneath the thin air and faded Sunday. There are places where the story continues, slow and soundless, where the planet holds something close, tucked deep in its body like a memory too sacred to expose. Mars once flowed with rivers, now it holds them like secrets. And if you listen, if you press your instruments to the ice and wait for the echoes, you might hear the sound of something that never left. You might hear the soft outline of what was, not gone, just sleeping. For centuries, Mars appeared still. A frozen world, windswept and empty, its surface painted in dust and silence. No clouds to rumble, no oceans to churn, no forests to creak or cry out. It seemed motionless in every sense, a planet frozen not only in temperature, but in time. But stillness, like silence, is often a trick of distance, a kind of hush that conceals something deeper, something restless, something quietly awake. In 2018, a spacecraft named InSight touched down near the Martian equator, carrying with it one of the most sensitive instruments ever sent to another world. It was not built to see or to drill or to fly. It was built to listen. It planted a seismometer gently onto the ground, a small, shielded ear pressed to the crust of a planet that hadn't spoken in a very long time. Then it waited, and slowly Mars began to whisper back, not with crashing waves or shifting tectonic plates like Earth, but with soft, subtle tremors, quakes, small, sharp jolts beneath the ground, echoes of something stirring beneath the cold skin of the planet. At first, it was hard to tell whether they were real. Noise comes from everywhere in space. Thermal cracks from the spacecraft itself, wind brushing the lander's shell, vibrations from metal settling under the sun's heat. But some of the patterns didn't fit the noise. They were too deep, too pure, and they repeated. Again and again, Mars was not silent. It was humming. These Marsquakes, as they came to be called, are not as powerful as the quakes we feel on Earth. Most are gentle, barely a tremor, as if the planet is breathing in its sleep. But some are stronger, enough to shift rocks, to stir the dust, to send echoes rippling through the interior. They reveal something critical. Mars is not geologically dead. It is dormant, maybe, but not lifeless beneath. It has a core, it has structure, it has motion, and every tremor tells us a little more about its hidden heart. On Earth, quakes reveal the layers of our planet like sonar. The waves travel through crust and mantle, bending and bouncing at boundaries, changing speed depending on the material they pass through. Scientists can read these patterns to map the shape and depth of the world beneath our feet. On Mars, it's the same. The waves from Marsquakes, faint though they are, travel inward. They bounce and bend and return, carrying secrets in their timing. From these subtle signals, a picture begins to form. Beneath the dusty crust, roughly 20 to 40 kilometers thick, lies a mantle, colder and more stagnant than Earth's, but still present. And deeper still, at the heart of the planet, is a core, liquid, larger than expected, rich in sulfur and lighter elements, swirling slowly in the dark. It does not generate a magnetic field anymore. Mars lost that long ago, but it still moves. It still holds heat. It still listens and responds, like something alive beneath the calm. InSight captured over 1,000 Marsquakes in its lifetime, ranging from tiny murmurs to more significant rumbles. Some came from far away, striking deep beneath old volcanic regions like Cerberus fossae, places where the crust is thinner, cracked, more prone to stress. Others were closer, the result of slow cooling and contraction, of a planet still shrinking as it ages. And sometimes, there were no clear origins at all, just tremors from below, unconnected to any surface feature. Messages from deep within. There is something profoundly intimate about listening to a planet, not watching from afar, not capturing images or measuring light, but listening, waiting, feeling the tiny shifts as a world turns beneath you. The InSight lander sat still for years, exposed to storms and cold, just to hold its instrument against the ground and hear what the planet had to say. And what it heard was not chaos, not silence, but rhythm, subtle and strange and alive. Mars does not have plate tectonics like Earth. Its crust doesn't drift or collide or subduct, but pressure builds, and rocks crack, and energy is released. That's all a quake needs, a moment of motion, a sudden shift in the deep. And in those shifts, we glimpse not only the structure of Mars, but its story, a planet that once had fire, a planet that built mountains taller than anything in the solar system, a planet that cooled, slowly, painfully, from the inside out, but not all at once. Not completely. Some heat remains, some motion lingers, enough to whisper. There is no roar beneath the Martian soil, but there is a pulse. Even now, long after its rivers dried and its sky thinned, Mars continues to flex and settle. Its core spins, its mantle shrinks, its crust cracks. Not dramatically, not often, but enough. Enough to remind us that it is not a fossil, not yet. Listening to these quakes, scientists are rewriting the history of the red planet. They are mapping its layers, decoding its age, reimagining its evolution. But more than that, they are building a connection, a line from Earth to Mars that doesn't rely on sight, but on vibration, on feeling, on resonance. And in that resonance, something beautiful happens. Mars is no longer just a distant rock, no longer just a destination. It is a voice, a body, a presence that speaks slowly, carefully, through the language of shifting stone. It has a past, yes, but also a present. And maybe, beneath all the dust and silence, a future. The InSight mission came to a quiet end, its solar panels dimmed by dust, its sensors stilled. But the sounds it captured continue to echo in our minds. They are soft, but they are real. And in their patterns, we find something remarkable. Mars is not asleep. it dreams. And sometimes it stirs. On Mars, your weight changes, but your mass does not. The atoms that make you are the same. Your bones, your breath, your heart, all move within the same skin. But the planet beneath your feet holds you differently. It pulls with less force, less insistence. Just 38% of what you feel on Earth. That means if you weighed 180 pounds under Earth's sky, you'd weigh just over 68 on Mars. The same you, but lighter. Not in essence, but in experience. It isn't like floating. Not really. You don't drift. You don't rise. But the difference is there in every step, every stretch. A jump lifts you higher than it should. A stumble takes longer to land. Even walking feels like a dance between muscle memory and relearning. Like you're dreaming of movement, and your body is answering in slow, curious motion. Things fall slower. Arms lift easier. The strain you expect never quite arrives. Gravity, we often forget, is the one constant we never question. It's with us from birth. We learn to stand by pushing against it. We fall and rise again because of it. Our blood flows with it. Our sleep forms in its embrace. On Mars, that certainty loosens. You aren't undone, but you are changed. Not all at once, but subtly. Your center of balance shifts. Your stride lengthens. And over time, your body begins to wonder if the Earth was just a dream. The physics are simple, but the sensation is strange. Objects seem to weigh less, yes, but that means they behave differently too. A tool tossed too hard keeps going. A footstep intended for caution covers twice the ground. Lifting isn't hard, but stopping what you've lifted might be. The rhythm of movement becomes something you study rather than feel. It's as if your body is learning a second language, one where the verbs are softer, and time stretches between action and result. Astronauts train for this. They use parabolic flights, harnesses, underwater simulations. They prepare their muscles and minds for the shift. But nothing on Earth can fully replicate the quiet strangeness of Martian gravity, because it isn't just physical. It's psychological, emotional. Something about being lighter changes how you feel about space, about limits, about effort. You begin to unlearn the weight of your own expectations. Imagine running across a stretch of Martian dust. Your legs push down, but the resistance is low. You rise farther than you meant to. Your arc is longer, your landing softer. It's exhilarating at first, almost like flying, but it can also be disorienting. Speed builds differently. Friction plays new games. Falls are gentler, but less predictable. Everything is familiar, and everything is wrong. In low gravity, your body starts to adapt. Muscles used to constant work begin to relax. Bones, no longer pressed so tightly together, begin to loosen their density. The heart, relieved of some of its uphill battle, shifts in rhythm, and over time, days, weeks, months, your body becomes Martian. Not entirely, not irrevocably, but enough. Enough to feel the difference if you ever returned, and what a return that would be. Back on Earth, gravity would feel heavy, punishing. Your steps would drag, your arms would tire. The familiar would become unfamiliar. The weight you once wore like skin would feel like armor. It's possible, even likely, that for a little while you would miss the lightness, not just in motion, but in spirit. Because being light changes more than your steps. It changes your sense of self. On Mars, gravity pulls less, but it still holds. You don't float away. You don't drift into the sky. You are grounded, but gently, as if the planet is less possessive of you, as if you are a guest rather than a resident. That subtle shift changes how you build, how you live. Structures need less support. Fuel needs less thrust. Movements need less force. Everything recalibrates around the new rules, but those rules aren't always kinder. Low gravity has its costs. Muscle atrophy, bone loss, fluid shifts. The body grows lazy in the absence of pressure. Even the eyes can change, reshaped by the way fluids move in altered gravity. Sleep patterns shift. Appetite changes. The very machinery of the human body starts to question what it's for. We are made for one planet, and yet we dream of others. So what happens when your body forgets what heaviness feels like? What happens when your inner ear stops longing for the pull it once knew? When your balance rewrites itself and your sense of effort becomes thinner, stranger, softer? You might feel free. You might feel unmoored. You might feel like something in between, a being caught between two gravities, belonging fully to neither. There's a poetry in that. To live on Mars is to live in a space of compromise, between the familiar and the foreign, between what your body remembers and what it must now learn. Gravity becomes not just a force, but a question. What does it mean to be held? What does it mean to push, to fall, to rise? What does it mean when those answers change? On Earth, we learn the answers young. We fall as toddlers and rise stronger. We feel gravity every time we grow tired, every time we bend, every time we ache. But on Mars, the ache is different. The pull is lighter. The body drifts more easily through space. And over time, it begins to forget. Not just the numbers, but the feeling. The deep, unconscious sense of how heavy a moment should be. And maybe that forgetting is a kind of freedom. Or maybe it's the start of becoming something new. Something stretched between worlds. Lighter, but not less. Different, but still human. A creature of weight, learning to live without it. A day on Mars is nearly a twin to our own. Not exact, but close enough to feel familiar in the strangest way. 24 hours and 37 minutes. That's all. Just a sliver more than what Earth gives us. A thin slice of extra time, tucked quietly onto the edge of every Martian rotation. They call it a sol. Not a day. Not quite. But almost. That almost is everything. At first, the difference feels harmless. A curiosity. Something you might mention in passing, like a time zone that runs slightly slow. But the strangeness creeps in quietly, because when something is just off enough to be noticeable, but not enough to be obvious, it starts to stretch your sense of rhythm. You wake with the sun, but the sun rises a little later each morning. You go to sleep at night, but each night creeps forward by almost 40 minutes. Within days, you're out of sync with your own clock. Within weeks, the concept of morning becomes more of a suggestion than a certainty. For the rovers that roam the Martian plains, this slow drift is their normal. They power down as the sun sets, curling into a kind of mechanical slumber, conserving energy through the long, cold night. When the light returns, they stretch back into motion. Wakefulness dictated not by alarm clocks, but by sunlight on their panels. It's an elegant rhythm, solar sleep and solar rise. A machine's version of a heartbeat in tune with a foreign world. But for the humans who guide them from Earth, that rhythm becomes more complicated. NASA engineers working with Mars missions often shift to Mars time, syncing their workday to the sol so they can communicate with the rovers when they're awake. That means adjusting their own sleep cycles by 37 minutes every day. At first, it seems manageable, almost like adjusting to jet lag. But over time, the days slip into night, the nights into day, and your body starts forgetting when it's supposed to be tired. It's not enough of a difference to feel like another planet, but it is enough to feel wrong. Time doesn't just pass on Mars. It stretches. You wouldn't notice it right away. Not in the way that you notice the absence of gravity or the change in air. But over weeks, it would become something you feel more than understand. Your meals might slip forward into the evenings. Your sleep might become lighter, less certain. The sun would shift by minutes, then hours, patterns that anchor your thoughts. Sunrise, sunset, midday, midnight would begin to lose their hold. On Earth, our biology is carved by 24-hour cycles, circadian rhythms, hormone releases, body temperature fluctuations. They align with the turning of our planet, honed over millions of years. But move to Mars, and suddenly, those rhythms run too fast. The planet spins slower. Your biology starts to lap the world it's living in, and little by little, the misalignment shows. Fatigue, insomnia, a sense that time is always slightly out of reach. But the strangeness doesn't end there, because while a sol is longer than an Earth day, a Martian year is nearly twice as long. The seasons stretch. The waits between sunrises grow slightly each day. The sky changes slower. Even the clocks designed for Mars tick a little differently. Seconds are still seconds, but they carry just a bit more weight, just enough to unsettle the habits you didn't know you'd built. And yet, there's something gentle in it. Time on Mars doesn't rush. It glides. A little slower, a little softer. The days give you more room. The light lingers longer. Tasks stretch with less pressure. There's no hurry in a sol. No frantic chasing of the clock. Just the slow unfolding of hours that feel like they've been padded with quiet. It's as if the planet gives you space to breathe, to think, to simply be. For the machines, this rhythm is perfect. Solar panels gather light more evenly. Energy budgets balance with more time to plan. Data trickles in at a pace that matches the world it comes from. Opportunity, spirit, curiosity, all of them live their lives one sol at a time. No rush, no panic. Just steady, methodical movement across alien soil. And perhaps, in time, humans will learn to live that way too. To adjust, to drift, to let the extra minutes soften their grip on the earthbound clock. It won't be easy. Our minds cling to time as if it defines us. But on Mars, time humbles. It stretches us. It asks us to be patient, to listen, to slow down enough to hear the silence between the seconds. Imagine watching a Martian sunset in your own time. The sky, thin and soft, darkening slowly from butterscotch to gray-blue. The shadows of rocks stretching long and low across the red soil. The wind stilled. No rush of cars, no hum of streetlights. Just the sound of your own breath in the helmet, sinking to the gentle turning of a slower world. And when you lie down at the end of a sol, the stars above you do not race. They wheel with grace, with patience. The night is long, the sleep deeper. Your dreams stretch into those extra minutes, and maybe you start to believe that this is the way time was meant to feel. Not like something to chase, but something to rest in. Not fast, not fleeting, just enough. Mars tilts, just like Earth. Not much, but just enough. About 25 degrees, close to our planet's 23.5. And that quiet lean is what gives Mars its seasons. Spring, summer, autumn, winter. Not symbolic ones, not poetic metaphors, but actual physical change marked by the passage of time and the way sunlight slides differently across the planet's surface. It's subtle, it's sharp, and it's often forgotten behind the veil of red dust and silence. But Mars does turn, and that turning brings with it the breath of change. There's no chirping of birds in a Martian spring, no green buds unfolding, no flowers leaning toward the light. But there are other signs. Dry carbon dioxide at the poles, frozen CO2, not water, begins to sublimate as sunlight returns, vanishing straight from solid to vapor. White frost clings to the edges of dunes and shadows, then disappears into the morning air like ghosts. The ground breathes out, and above it, faint clouds form, thin as gauze, drifting high in the whisper-thin atmosphere. They carry no rain, but they move, they shift, they mark the beginning of something. In summer, the dust devils come, spirals of red wind, twisting quietly across the plains. They seem playful from a distance, light, lazy whirlwinds that trace circles through the dust. But they are real weather. They rise hundreds of meters into the sky, leaving dark trails behind them, like memories carved into the surface. Curiosity caught them once, camera tilted upward, watching the sky as a funnel passed by like a slow exhale. There is no thunder, no roar, just motion. Mars spins, and the air moves, and in the movement, a kind of life pulses through the dust. Autumn comes differently. The days shorten, the temperatures begin to fall, not in sudden shifts, but in a slow, planetary sigh. The light grows thinner, shadows stretch longer. The atmosphere begins to change its mood again, pulling moisture from the air, letting ice creep back across the poles. It's a quieting, a dimming, not the falling of leaves, but the curling inward of a world preparing for its cold breath. And winter on Mars is bitter, especially near the poles, where temperatures plunge to negative 125 degrees Celsius, where the thin air grows thinner still as it freezes straight from gas to solid, painting the planet in pale patches of carbon dioxide frost. Entire landscapes vanish beneath layers of white, not snow, not like we know it. There's no flake, no soft fall, just the formation of frost like a secret silent claim. Craters become bowls of ice. Ridges wear scarves of white, and beneath it all, the ground waits. Mars has seasons, yes, but not life, not yet. So these shifts happen in solitude, a calendar turning pages for a world that doesn't read them, and still, they turn. The seasons on Mars are longer than ours. A Martian year is almost twice as long, so each season stretches out, nearly 6 Earth months of summer, 6 months of winter, but it's not balanced. Because the orbit of Mars isn't a neat circle like Earth's. It's elliptical, stretched out slightly, which means that southern summer is more intense and shorter, while northern summer is longer, more mild. Southern winters are sharper, northern winters linger. The world breathes out of rhythm with itself, hemispheres locked in unequal dance, and that unevenness shapes the landscape. The southern hemisphere is more cratered, older, higher in elevation. In its winters, the cold deepens fast, and the frost returns with force. The northern hemisphere, lower and smoother, wears its seasons more gently. But even there, change is constant. Every year, water ice clouds gather. Every year, the air shifts, carrying dust from pole to pole. Every year, sunlight slants just enough to move shadows from one side of a rock to the other. On Earth, seasons are soaked in emotion. They mark memory. Summer is laughter and heat. Autumn is endings and gold light. Winter is silence and waiting. Spring is promise. But on Mars, these seasons are stripped of all that. There are no forests to burn in color, no meadows to bloom, no waves to freeze. It is a cycle without a witness, a rhythm without response. And still, it happens. The tilt remains. The orbit continues. The sun moves across the Martian sky, slow and precise, and the world turns. One could argue that it's all mechanical, that it's physics and math and timing, that the seasons of Mars are just clockwork in dust and ice. But there's something more to it, something in the way the frost curls into the edges of boulders, something in the way the same dunes change their shape from year to year, something in the way light softens as solstice approaches. Mars may be quiet, but it's not still, and maybe, one day, that quiet will be interrupted. Maybe one spring, footsteps will press into thawing ground. Maybe a human voice will echo off the frost-covered rocks. Maybe in summer, solar panels will tilt themselves into the warmth. Maybe in autumn, someone will watch the lengthening shadows from the window of a habitat dome. And maybe in winter, someone will whisper under their breath, not to Earth, but to Mars itself. It's beautiful here. For now, the seasons come and go without anyone to name them. But they are there, waiting for time to catch up, waiting for company, waiting to be seen. The air on Mars is not air as we know it. It's a whisper of something that once might have been more, now thinned to the edge of nothing. 96% carbon dioxide, almost no oxygen. No cushion of pressure to keep lungs from collapsing. No invisible shield to hold warmth or block radiation. Step outside without a suit, and you will not choke or cough or gasp. You will simply lose the ability to draw breath. Your body wouldn't have time to panic. Mars would take the air before you even had a chance to miss it. Breathing is something we do without thought, a silent agreement between our lungs and the atmosphere we live inside. Inhale, exhale, repeat. Oxygen in, carbon dioxide out. But that agreement does not exist on Mars. It is a place that rejects breath. The carbon dioxide fills the atmosphere like a ghost of life's opposite. Every inhale would be useless, every exhale unanswered. And it isn't just what's in the air that makes it dangerous. It's also what's missing. On Earth, sea level pressure is a comforting, constant presence, about 101 kilopascals. On Mars, that number falls to less than 1, barely a wisp. There's so little pressure that liquid water can't remain stable on the surface. It either freezes or boils away. The same would happen to the moisture in your lungs, the saliva in your mouth, the surface of your eyes. Without protection, your body would begin to lose water to the air in an instant, not with heat, but with absence, not fire, but vacuum. The Mars suit isn't just a barrier. It's a life system. It holds pressure in. It creates an atmosphere around you, like a fragile bubble clinging to the idea of Earth. It filters and recycles and presses against your skin with gentle force. It carries your breath with you. Without it, you are not just unprotected, you are erased. The planet does not punish you for stepping outside without a suit. It simply does not care. That indifference is what makes it haunting. You can stand on a Martian plain under a sky the color of peach dust and see for miles in every direction. The silence will stretch out until your thoughts begin to echo. You can watch the sun rise, smaller and paler than you're used to, and feel nothing on your face. No warmth, no breeze. The helmet might fog slightly with each breath, but outside the glass, the world is still and thin. It looks survivable, but it isn't. There is no weather in the way we understand it. Wind exists, yes, but it moves quietly, without push. It lifts dust, but not you. It passes over rock and crater without leaving scars. It cannot ruffle hair or cool skin. The atmosphere is too light to carry force, but it still moves, still shifts, and within it, that overwhelming carbon dioxide hangs, waiting. A gas we exhale, a gas that feeds plants, but poisons us in high concentration. On Mars, it's nearly everything. The human body is fragile when it comes to breathing. A few minutes without oxygen, and neurons begin to fade. A few more, and systems shut down. On Mars, without a suit, you wouldn't even make it to the panic. There'd be no sharp chest pain, no desperate inhale. Just a failure of the agreement your body thought it had with the world. The air would touch your skin like static. Your lungs would open to emptiness. And the last thing you'd know is that the sky above you still looked beautiful, even as it gave you nothing. And yet, we send machines. We send landers and rovers, and soon, people. We pack our atmosphere into tanks, build habitats that recreate pressure, and seal ourselves into containers that float through the toxic thinness. We do this not because Mars is welcoming, but because it challenges us in the way only a beautiful threat can. It dares us to learn how to live where life doesn't belong, and slowly, we try. There are ideas, concepts of growing algae or engineered microbes in sealed domes to convert carbon dioxide into breathable air. Proposals for habitats buried in Martian soil, protected from radiation, generating oxygen from ice and regolith. Machines like Moxie, small, experimental, but real, already working to turn that choking atmosphere into something survivable. It's not fast, but it's beginning. Still, for now, Mars remains a place where humans cannot breathe. You can walk its surface in your dreams, imagining the crunch of regolith under boots, imagining the sound of your own breath echoing inside your helmet. But take the suit away, and the planet reminds you of your place. Not as a resident, not yet, but as a guest, temporary, fragile, held together by layers of fabric and science and hope. And when you return to Earth, when you breathe without thought again, something will have changed. You'll remember what it means to take air for granted, to feel the weight of atmosphere around you, pressing gently on your skin, feeding every cell without permission or thanks. You'll close your eyes and think of a red world where the sky is silent, where the wind doesn't touch, where the air is full but unbreathable. And you'll understand something quiet. Mars is not empty. It is full of everything we cannot use, and yet we reach for it anyway. Mars wears its rust like a memory, a soft, powdery red that coats its skin, seeping into every crack, every crater, every wind-blown dune. It's not the bright, gleaming rust of an old tool left out in the rain. It's older, finer, ground down by time into dust so thin it can ride the lightest winds. A planet dusted in iron oxide, painted by oxidation over billions of years. It didn't always look like this, but slowly, atom by atom, breath by invisible breath, Mars turned red. The iron was always there, locked into its rocks, embedded in its soil. Iron is common in the universe. It forms in dying stars, scattered in the aftermath of supernovae, drifting into the material that eventually becomes planets. Mars inherited it from the beginning. But the red came later, when something more intimate happened, when the planet began to change, to open itself to a kind of slow decay. Oxidation is not violent. It doesn't explode or tear or flash. It creeps. When iron meets even a whisper of oxygen, be it from water, from air, from the breakdown of molecules, it begins to shift, to rearrange itself, to let go of its shine and take on the muted red of rust. And Mars, long ago, had water, had air, had time. So the iron began to rust, not in a moment, but over epochs, over seasons, over the soft turning of years without names, and that rust became dust. On Earth, rust is something we try to prevent. It's a sign of wear, of age, of things falling apart. But on Mars, rust is the language of transformation. It's what gives the planet its identity, what makes it recognizable, even from tens of millions of kilometers away. That familiar, soft red glow. It's not a warning, not a danger. It's a fingerprint, a quiet whisper of history. The dust is everywhere. Not just on the surface, but suspended in the thin air, drifting in layers, catching sunlight, and scattering it into strange hues. That's why the sky looks red during the day. The light hits the dust, and the shorter wavelengths, blue, green, scatter away first. What reaches your eyes, filtered through rust, is red, but at sunset, the dust plays a trick. The angles shift, the reds and oranges scatter out, and for just a little while, the sky turns blue. A deep, pale blue that lingers near the fading sun before night returns. The rust doesn't just color the ground. It climbs onto everything that lands there. Rovers, landers, instruments. They arrive clean, but they don't stay that way. Mars dust is so fine it slips into joints and filters, coats lenses, clings to wheels. It's sticky, not because it's wet, but because it's electrostatically charged. Each particle is a ghost with a tiny pull. Together, they become a storm of memory, settling onto machines like the hands of a planet that hasn't forgotten how to touch. But for all its redness, Mars is not a place of passion or fire. Its red is not the flush of life or the burn of heat. It's the color of iron grown tired, of stone that has forgotten the feel of rivers, of a surface that once knew motion and has since gone still. The red is beautiful, yes, but it's also a kind of silence. And there's something else. Mars doesn't see its own color. It has no eyes, no creatures to reflect its image, no minds to interpret its palette. The redness is for us, for our orbiters and cameras and human eyes behind screens, marveling at what it means to be painted in rust. On Earth, color means something. It signals, it seduces, it warns. On Mars, it just is, an outcome of chemistry, of time, of exposure. But we can't help but assign it meaning. We look at the red, and we think of war, of fire, of heat. Mars, named for a god of violence, carries a reputation in myth and memory that doesn't match its true nature. The planet isn't angry, it's ancient. It isn't burning, it's freezing. The redness is not fury, it's the residue of loss. Still, when we dream of stepping foot on Mars, we imagine that red dust clinging to our boots. We picture it smudged into our gloves, brushed from the visors of our helmets. It's in our paintings, our movies, our thoughts. That color has become shorthand for another world, and one day it may become home. There is something humbling in knowing that a planet can be so defined by something so simple. Iron and oxygen, dust and light. And yet, through that simplicity, Mars becomes unforgettable, not because it is bright, but because it is quiet, not because it is full, but because it has been emptied and still remains. And maybe that's what the red really means, that even in stillness, a planet can speak, that even in silence, it can shine, that even without life, it can wear the memory of transformation. That rust is not just decay, it is history made visible, and Mars is covered in it. Every storm lifts more of it into the sky. Every gust of wind spreads it further. Every robot we send there becomes coated in it, becomes part of it. And every image we receive carries the red back to us, pixel by pixel, like a message written in dust. Mars does not change quickly, but it remembers, and it shows us, in its color, just how long it has been doing so. There was a time when Mars had a shield. Not a visible one, not made of metal or stone or walls, but a field, a soft, invisible barrier made from the spinning of a molten heart, wrapping the planet in safety. Like Earth does now, Mars once held a magnetic field, a global force that reached out into space and whispered, "Not here," to the charged particles riding the solar wind. It deflected the radiation, cradled the atmosphere, and helped keep warmth from slipping away too easily. For a while, it worked. For a while, it held. But something changed. Somewhere deep inside, the heart of the planet began to cool. It didn't happen all at once. Planets age like glaciers, quietly, without ceremony. The molten iron core, once churning and convecting, began to slow. And as the dynamo stilled, the field weakened. Bit by bit, the protective shroud around Mars began to vanish. The shield cracked, and then it faded. Without it, the planet was left exposed. Not to fire or storms, but to something quieter, more relentless. The sun's solar wind. Streams of high-energy particles flung outward at hundreds of kilometers per second began to graze against Mars with no resistance. It was like breathing out into a vacuum. The particles struck the upper atmosphere and stripped it away, molecule by molecule, year after year, in a theft so slow it could almost be mistaken for peace. And as the air vanished, so did the warmth, so did the pressure. Water that might have once pooled on the surface fled to the poles or sank beneath the ground. Rivers stopped running. Oceans shrank into memory, and the sky, thinned and robbed, lost its hold on time and temperature. Days swung between harsh extremes. Nights deepened into cold that could crack metal. Mars wasn't destroyed, but it was changed, silently, deeply. The ghosts of that lost magnetic field are still there. Not above, not around, but beneath, locked into ancient rocks, especially in the southern highlands, where crust older than anything on Earth still lies undisturbed. These rocks remember. They hold faint imprints of the field that once was, like echoes of a lullaby long forgotten. When orbiters fly overhead, their instruments catch whispers of magnetism, patchy, weak, localized fields, trapped in stone, like embers in cooling ash. Not strong enough to protect a planet, but strong enough to remind us it was once protected. On Earth, we don't notice our magnetic field, but it's there, shielding us from radiation, guiding the northern and southern lights, helping migratory animals find their way. It is both shield and map, and it is powered by the churning of our core, a hot and liquid engine that never truly rests. But Mars has no such motion now. Its heart has quieted, its map has faded, and its sky, once held by that invisible hand, was left to drift. What happens to a planet when it loses its protection? It becomes fragile. It becomes vulnerable. The sun does not aim to destroy, but it is indifferent. Its light gives life, but its wind takes it. Without a magnetic field to push back, Mars had no choice but to yield. The upper atmosphere began to erode, and as the pressure dropped, the surface changed. Ultraviolet light rained down more freely. Radiation seeped through the thin air. Life, if it ever existed there, had to go underground or disappear entirely. The MAVEN spacecraft, Mars atmosphere and volatile evolution, was sent to trace the contours of this loss. It flew above the planet, measuring how particles escape, how they're lifted and carried away by the solar wind. What it found was confirmation of the slow unraveling. The atmosphere is still leaking. Even now, with so little left, Mars continues to exhale into space, softly and silently, like a sigh it has been holding for billions of years. And yet, even in that loss, there is a kind of beauty, because Mars is not a ruin. It's a memory. It's a place shaped by time in the most patient of ways. It didn't explode or collapse. It transformed. And in that transformation, it became something we study, something we reach toward. Its lack is not a failure. It is an opening, a space for us to ask what might have been and what could still be. We wonder what would have happened if the dynamo had continued, if the core had stayed hot, if the field had never failed. Would Mars have held its oceans? Would the sky have thickened with clouds? Would life have grown, slow and strange, beneath the red dust? Would it have become a twin to Earth, not a distant cousin? These are questions with no answers. But they matter, because they help us see what makes a planet live. Not just rock and gravity, but protection. Not just water, but the conditions that keep it. Now, we imagine building that protection ourselves. Habitat domes, magnetic shields, terraforming plans that stretch across centuries. Because the desire to breathe on Mars hasn't faded, even though the field has. We want to go where breath is not possible, and make it possible. We want to walk a world that once let go of life, and offer it back, even if just in a whisper, even if just in a few small protected rooms, lit by artificial suns and warmed by machines that hum like artificial hearts. And maybe that's enough. Maybe it's enough to remember that shields can fail, but they can also be built again. That planets can lose their warmth, but we can carry warmth with us. That magnetic fields are not promises, but possibilities. Mars lost its shield, but it did not lose its story. It snows on Mars, but not the way we know it. Not the soft, glistening flakes that fall in silence and settle on rooftops. Not the kind that crunch under boots or gather on window panes. Martian snow is stranger, colder, rarer, and almost invisible. It isn't made of water, not usually. It's carbon dioxide, dry ice, falling from a sky so thin it can barely hold its breath. The air is quiet, the pressure low, and the snow that forms doesn't drift like it does on Earth. It simply appears, like a secret arriving too softly to notice. In the coldest places, near the poles and during the longest winters, Mars releases this delicate frost from its atmosphere. the planet exhales. Temperatures drop below minus 120 degrees Celsius, and the carbon dioxide gas in the air begins to condense straight into solid form. No liquid phase, no rain first. Just vapor to crystal, like a transformation that skips a step entirely. Snowflakes of CO2, smaller than grains of sand, shimmer as they descend, glinting in the thin light of dawn or twilight. If you stood beneath them, you might not feel them touch your skin at all, and they vanish just as quietly. The Phoenix lander saw them once, not with eyes, but with instruments. LiDAR pulses bouncing back at strange angles, revealing a drifting haze that fell from clouds above and faded before it ever reached the ground. It was snow, but it was shy, suspended in air that couldn't quite hold it. On Earth, we'd call that virga, precipitation that evaporates before it touches down. But on Mars, it's more like a whisper from the sky that doesn't need to land to be real. There are places where it does reach the surface. The poles, layered in ice that comes and goes with the seasons. In the dark of the Martian winter, the CO2 from the air falls and accumulates, forming temporary caps of dry ice. It doesn't last forever. When spring returns and sunlight stretches its fingers across the poles, the frozen carbon dioxide sublimates, returning directly to gas. The cycle begins again. Breath to crystal, crystal to breath. Snow on Mars doesn't build snowmen. It doesn't close schools or coat branches in white. It doesn't glitter under streetlights or gather in footprints. It's too thin, too light, too fleeting. But it's still snow. A kind of snow only this world could make, and that makes it no less magical. It's the breath of the planet crystallized into form. It's cold made visible. And it reminds us that even in places that seem barren or lifeless, there are still seasons, still rhythms, still moments of beauty. And sometimes, water snow does fall too. In very specific conditions, high up in the atmosphere, within rare clouds of water ice, tiny flakes of H2O can form. But these too are faint. They don't build drifts. They don't survive long, but they exist. Rovers have seen the frost left behind, thin films of frozen water spreading across surfaces at night, vanishing with the sun's first light. Not because it melts, but because it sublimates. Like everything on Mars, skipping steps, choosing silence over spectacle. The planet doesn't need a thick blanket of snow to know winter. It knows cold more intimately than we ever could. It knows the kind of cold that doesn't bite but seeps. A cold that erases time, not just warmth. The kind of cold where nothing moves, and even sound gives up trying to travel. The cold of a world without breath. And still, it snows. Even in that stillness, flakes form. Clouds swirl. Frost grows. The dunes collect patterns of light and shadow, shaped by wind and dust and cold. It's not the winter we imagine, but it's a kind of winter all the same. And perhaps it's more honest, stripped of comfort, stripped of stories. Just cold, and the quiet resilience of a world that keeps turning regardless. What would it feel like to stand there, to be inside a suit, warm but watching, as carbon dioxide snow drifts around you in patterns too fine for the eye? To know that this snow is not here for beauty or memory or play, but because the planet demands it. Because the chemistry of the air and the tilt of the axis and the orbit of Mars conspire to create it. It would be like standing in the middle of a secret that has no need to be told. There are photos of the poles taken from orbit, showing strange branching patterns in the ice. Spiders, they're called, though they are not creatures. They form when CO2 ice traps gas beneath it, and the pressure eventually breaks through in geysers, carving channels beneath the surface before erupting in silent bursts of dust. Even snow, even frost, can be violent when it needs to be. Even the quietest elements have force behind them when given time and pressure. But mostly, Mars is gentle with its snow. It falls unseen. It coats without sound. it vanishes without trace. And in that, there is something soothing, something almost tender. On a planet where the wind can howl for hours and the sky can fill with dust thick enough to block the sun, snow is a softer side. A brief moment of grace. A reminder that even the harshest places have their moments of stillness. That not everything loud is important, and not everything small is forgettable. Mars has snow, not like ours, but maybe more beautiful for that very reason. They are not alive, and yet they move with purpose, with memory, with tasks handed down from a world millions of kilometers away. They do not breathe, but they wait for sunlight. They do not sleep, but they rest. They are machines, yes, but they are also stories, pieces of Earth placed gently on another world, set loose to roam without a hand to guide them. Spirit, opportunity, curiosity, perseverance, each with a name that stretches far beyond metal and wire, each one sent to wander, to witness, to endure. Spirit was the first to get stuck. Wheels sunk into soil that looked firm but wasn't. It fought for a while, spinning and struggling, trying to pull itself free with commands from across the void. But the planet wouldn't let go. Dust gathered, power faded, and eventually the signal went quiet. Not all at once, but in pieces, like a voice trailing off mid-sentence. No last words. Just a final whisper across the stars, then nothing. It wasn't a failure. It was an ending. And endings, even for machines, carry weight. Opportunity outlived everything. Designed for 90 days, it stayed for 15 years. It climbed craters, took pictures of its own tracks, watched dust devils dance in the distance, and sunsets that lingered too long. It made the red planet feel less empty, not because it was human, but because it was there, present, listening, observing. And when the great storm came, it waited. It waited through the darkness, through the silence, through weeks of shadow without sunlight. It waited until its batteries ran low, until it could no longer call home. My battery is low, and it's getting dark. Not its real last words, but the ones we gave it. The ones we needed. A kind of eulogy. A way to say goodbye to something that never spoke, but somehow still meant something. A robot built to explore became a symbol of perseverance, of staying, of holding on just a little longer. And when it didn't wake back up, people cried. Not because it was alive, but because it was brave. Curiosity is still moving. Slowly, but steadily. It hums across Gale Crater, measuring radiation, tasting rocks, watching the weather shift in tiny, almost invisible ways. It sings to itself once a year, on its birthday. A soft, mechanical version of Happy Birthday played into the emptiness. No one is there to hear it, but it sings anyway, because someone programmed it to, because it matters to us that it feels remembered, that something made by our hands keeps going, even when we've long stopped listening. And then there's perseverance, the newest, the most advanced, landing with choreography so precise it bordered on poetry. It carried with it a tiny helicopter, ingenuity, meant only for a handful of flights, but still dancing above the Martian dust many missions later. Perseverance drills into rock and stores samples in sealed tubes, tiny time capsules waiting for a future mission to retrieve them. A message in a bottle sent backward through time, not for Mars, but for us. The rovers are not explorers in the human sense. They don't wonder or feel awe. They don't gaze at the horizon and imagine what might be beyond it. But they do move, they do adapt, they do persist. And that, in its own way, is a kind of soul. Not the kind you can weigh or see, but the kind you feel when you watch a small machine crest a distant hill and pause, just for a moment, as if to look. They are our eyes, our hands, our breath held in circuits. They touch a world we cannot yet reach and tell us what it feels like, not with words, but with data. with dust patterns and chemical traces and temperature graphs that whisper the story of a planet still becoming. And in that whisper, something extraordinary happens. We start to feel less alone because they're out there, still working, still sending signals through space that arrive like postcards from a silent sibling. They remind us that exploration isn't always about conquest or arrival. Sometimes it's about presence, about placing something delicate in a place it doesn't belong and watching it make a home, even a temporary one. Mars is not gentle. Its temperatures swing violently. Its winds are dry and sharp. Its soil is filled with perchlorates that would poison our blood. And yet we've left pieces of ourselves there, not to conquer, but to witness. And through the dust-caked eyes of these machines, we've seen new colors, heard the sigh of shifting regolith, measured the stretch of seasons on a world that does not speak. They are lonely, yes, but not forgotten. And maybe that's what makes them feel alive. Not the circuits or wheels or solar panels, but the connection they carry. The invisible thread stretched from earth to sky, from hand to machine, from question to answer. They are reminders that we can reach beyond ourselves, that we can create something that goes farther than we can, that we can send pieces of hope to places where hope has never existed. They won't last forever. Dust will thicken, power will fade, motors will stall. Each one will eventually stop, held in place by a landscape that doesn't care. But even then, they'll remain. Statues of curiosity, monuments to effort, silent machines beneath a sky that once glowed blue at sunset, waiting for eyes that may never come. And yet, still facing forward, still ready, still ours. The wind on Mars is not loud, but it works like time. Slowly, insistently, with patience that never tires. It scrapes, it scours. It presses grains of sand against surfaces for centuries, then pauses, then begins again. What it leaves behind is not chaos, it's sculpture. The Martian landscape, bare as it seems, is not empty. It is filled with forms, strange ones, pillars that rise like broken teeth, arches that look almost too symmetrical, shadows that stretch across the ground in patterns we weren't expecting, and shapes that don't quite make sense. We look at photos from rovers and orbiters and find ourselves tilting our heads. There, in the dust and stone, something emerges, a spiral, a ridge, a curve too perfect for randomness. Once, a rock shaped like a thigh bone. Another time, a formation like a serpent's head, half buried. Some see ruins, some see statues, some see fossils. We see echoes of ourselves, of life, of stories. But the truth is quieter than that. These are rocks, just rocks, weathered by wind and time and cold, shaped by erosion, fracture, and freeze. Mars doesn't need to hide secrets to be beautiful, but still, our minds reach. Because that's what minds do. We fill the silence with patterns. We search the unknown for familiarity. We try to make Mars make sense using the only tools we have: memory, emotion, imagination, pareidolia, they call it. The tendency to see faces in clouds, animals in shadows, meaning in randomness. On Earth, it's a cloud that looks like a dragon, or a tree knot shaped like an eye. On Mars, it's a boulder with just the right curve to suggest a skull, a cliff edge that seems to smile. When curiosity once captured an image of a rock shaped like a door frame, it sent imaginations racing. A doorway, people said. A passage. A ruin. But it was only a fracture. A slice of cliff sheared by nature into something startling. Not made, just formed. And yet, it felt significant, because in that illusion, there was wonder. The idea that something once walked through that opening, or carved it, that Mars had architects, that the stillness wasn't always so still, that someone, something, had been there before us and left behind signs, like breadcrumbs across red dust. But signs are not always truths, and still, there's awe in the error. Because these formations, even without mystery, are strange enough on their own. Yardangs, those wind-sculpted ridges, stretched and thinned by centuries of storm. Hoodoos, tall spires left standing after softer stone wore away around them. Natural bridges that cast long, low shadows, cracks that run for miles, rockfalls frozen in mid-collapse, canyons that open up with no warning, slicing through plains like scars. Each one tells a story of geology, not mythology. But somehow, both still feel sacred. There's a place called Medusae Fossae, a region so soft, so wind-worn, that its terrain looks almost melted, like wax cooling into folds. Some scientists think it's made of volcanic ash, compressed over time. Others suggest ancient mega-eruptions that dusted half the planet. But when you see it, really see it, it feels alien in a way that's hard to name. It doesn't look like Earth. It doesn't even try to. And that unfamiliarity unsettles something deep inside us. In other places, rocks appear stacked like cairns, balanced in ways that seem intentional, even delicate. No hands arrange them, just time and gravity and wind. But the effect is haunting. They feel like markers, like someone or something was here, left a sign, and moved on. The Viking landers first stirred this kind of wondering. Their black and white images, fuzzy and sharp all at once, revealed a landscape filled with oddities. One of them, in a place called Cydonia, showed a formation that looked uncannily like a face. A long, weathered visage with deep eye sockets and a stern brow. The face on Mars. For years, it was a source of fascination, even conspiracy. Later, higher resolution images revealed it to be just a hill. Its face only visible from a certain angle, in certain light. But even after the illusion broke, the curiosity didn't fade, because that face, imagined or not, touched something in us. It's not foolishness to look for meaning. It's humanity. We want Mars to speak, and sometimes the only language we know how to listen for is our own. So we interpret, we map, we theorize, we point to formations and say, that looks like, and we fill in the rest. We imagine bones, tombs, temples. We turn weathered stone into sculpture, into symbols, into stories. We look at a wind-cut ridge and wonder if it was once a wall. We trace the curves of a crater and wonder if it could be a basin, a harbor, a home. And maybe, in a way, that's okay, because these thoughts are not about deceiving ourselves. They're about connecting, about bridging the endless gap between us and a place that doesn't know us, a place that has never needed us, but still holds our dreams. The rocks will not answer, but they will endure. They will remain long after we stop asking, long after the rovers go silent and the orbits decay, long after our questions are forgotten or replaced, and they will still be beautiful, still strange, still standing in impossible shapes beneath an indifferent sky. Mars doesn't sculpt for us, but we notice anyway, we wonder anyway, and sometimes that wonder is the most honest thing we have. Beneath the surface of Mars, in places we haven't seen and may never touch, there could be something waiting, not in the way we often imagine. No writhing creatures, no clever eyes blinking in the dark, but something smaller, something quieter, a kind of life that doesn't roar or bloom, but endures. Buried in cold silence, sheltered from radiation, nestled in pockets where warmth and chemistry might still hold hands. It would not be thriving, it would be surviving, slowly, barely, but surviving all the same. On Earth, we've found them. Life forms that live in boiling acid, under glaciers, in nuclear waste, in deep-sea vents where sunlight has never been. Microbes sealed in permafrost for tens of thousands of years, waking up slowly when thawed. Bacteria feeding on minerals in the cracks of Antarctic rocks. Organisms that grow in the dark, eat stone, drink sulfur, and breathe metal. These are not myths. They're facts. Proof that life does not need comfort. It only needs a chance. Mars once had rivers, lakes, oceans. We know this now. It had rain and clouds and flowing water that cut valleys into its face. For a time, it may have had a thicker atmosphere, one capable of holding warmth, of holding hope. And if life began during that era, if somewhere, in some shallow pool, chemistry took a step toward biology, then perhaps it never truly ended. Perhaps when the air thinned and the surface froze, some of that early life retreated. Not up, but down. Into the ground, into cracks and caves, under layers of rock and ice, where it could outwait the storm. If so, it has been waiting for billions of years. The possibility is not science fiction. It's science, still unanswered. Instruments like the ones aboard the Mars Express orbiter and the Curiosity rover have found hints. Chemical traces in the soil, seasonal methane in the air. Methane is tricky. On Earth, it often comes from life. But it can come from geology too. Heat, rock, pressure. And yet, the methane on Mars behaves strangely. It spikes in the summer, dips in the winter, disappears and reappears. A pattern without a clear cause. It whispers something, but we don't know the language. Still, we listen. The InSight mission has been listening too, not for life, but for quakes. Vibrations that move through the ground and tell us what lies beneath. And every now and then, it picks up something unexpected. Tremors from within. Not loud, but persistent. As though Mars is still adjusting, still breathing, deep down. There are also the salt deposits. Crystalline signatures that suggest liquid water once moved here, recently enough to leave a mark. Under the South Polar ice cap, radar scans have found something reflective. Bright, possibly lakes, trapped beneath kilometers of frozen carbon dioxide and water ice. These would not be the kind of lakes you could sail across or drink from. They would be briny, thick with salt, cold enough to make time feel frozen. But in those alien waters, life could still hide. Not easily, not in abundance, but maybe in defiance. The search continues with robots, sensors, orbiters, not to find Martians, but to find microbes, traces, clues, the smallest hints of metabolism or memory. It is not an easy search. Life underground doesn't want to be found. If it's there, it has adapted to a world without light or comfort. It doesn't reach up. It doesn't announce itself. It's patient, and it's small. But small isn't nothing. Small is everything we once were. The earliest life on Earth was just like this. Microbial, ancient, almost invisible. It didn't need sunlight or air, just heat, minerals, and a place to settle. For billions of years, life on Earth stayed that way. Quiet, unassuming. That's how it starts. That's how it survives when everything else collapses. And maybe Mars had the same beginning. Maybe it shared a chapter before the pages split. Maybe what we see today is the afterimage of a twin world that diverged. Earth went one way, toward forests and oceans and breath. Mars went another, dry, still, silent. But silence doesn't always mean emptiness. It might mean secrecy. There's something humbling about not knowing. Something beautiful in the fact that we haven't solved this yet. That for all our machines and maps and measurements, there are still questions too deep for data. We drill, we scan, we wait. But some truths don't reveal themselves to force. They require quiet, patience, time. If life still exists on Mars, it will not welcome us. It will not wave. It will not bloom or glow. It will remain hidden, tucked beneath ancient layers, behind stone curtains, like a secret that never needed to be told. But it might still be there. And if it is, it would mean something profound. That life is not rare. That it is resilient. That it is more a consequence than an accident. Not a miracle, but a pattern. Not a gift, but a truth. A truth we're still learning how to hear. There are places on Mars where the land still remembers how it moved. Valleys so wide they stretch beyond the edge of vision, cliffs that drop like broken teeth from the crust, channels that twist and fork like rivers. Only there is no water left to trace them. Just rock, shaped by absence, carved by a flood that no longer flows. Stillness born from something that once roared. In the Martian lowlands, you can find them. Ancient outflow channels, many hundreds of kilometers long, braided and torn like the path of a runaway current. These are not gentle riverbeds. They are scars, wounds gouged into the planet's skin by water that arrived too fast and left too soon. And when it left, it didn't trickle away. It vanished, evaporated into the thin air, or sank into the ground and froze, leaving behind only shapes, traces, ghosts of movement. Once, billions of years ago, Mars was not the quiet place we see now. Something happened, something violent and sudden. Perhaps the ice cracked. Perhaps heat surged from below, melting frozen reservoirs and unleashing a cascade. Whatever the trigger, the result was catastrophic. The largest floods in the solar system poured across the Martian surface, dwarfing anything Earth has ever known. They didn't last long, a few weeks maybe, but the impact was permanent. Imagine it. Standing on that surface then, if such a thing were possible, you would hear the ground tremble before you saw the water. A low vibration through stone, followed by the rush of an ocean being pulled downhill. No time to run, no high ground safe. The flood would have swallowed craters, erased hills, reshaped landscapes that had stood still for eons. A surge not of streams, but of chaos. And then, just as suddenly, it ended. The water cooled. The atmosphere couldn't hold the moisture. With barely any air pressure to keep it liquid, the flood turned to vapor or ice, abandoning its own path. What remained were the channels: Ares Vallis, Casse Vallis, Maja Vallis. Names that sound like secrets whispered across sand. Their edges are sharp in some places, softened in others. Erosion still happens, but slowly. Nothing moves fast anymore on Mars. But back then, it moved too fast to forget. Some of these channels are so vast that you wouldn't realize they were carved by water at all. They look like valleys or plains until you step back, far back, and see the curves, the branching patterns, the way they stretch toward lower ground like fingers reaching for gravity. This is not wind erosion. This is not a glacier's slow crawl. This is the signature of water in a hurry. And in some places, you can see where the waterfalls would have been. High escarpments at the edge of plateaus, leading into sudden drops. There's no water tumbling there now, of course, only dust drifting in the thin breeze. But the shape is unmistakable. Water once fell here. Not trickled, not dripped, but plummeted. Torrents roaring off cliffs and crashing into the plains below with a force that would make even Earth's great rivers feel small. They are dry now, but they still echo, not with sound, but with memory. A kind of geological memory, frozen into stone. It doesn't fade like human memory does. It doesn't soften or change. It waits, patiently, for someone to read it, for someone to understand. And we try. We send rovers and satellites and radar pulses to scan the shapes, to map the fractures, to estimate how much water it would take to dig a trench so deep. The numbers are always staggering. These were not gentle floods. They were cataclysms, deluges that could have covered continents. And yet, they came and went before life had a chance to mark their passing. There are signs, too, that some of the floods may have happened more than once. That Mars didn't just bleed water once and fall silent, but pulsed. A cycle of freezing and thawing, triggered by shifting climates or volcanoes or impacts from space. Each time, the ice cracked open and water spilled across the surface, rewriting the story. But over time, the writing slowed. The ink dried up. The temperature fell. The magnetic field faded. The atmosphere thinned. And the the water vanished. Not completely, but enough to silence the surface, enough to make the planet seem lifeless. And yet, when we look at those dried-up channels now, we don't see death. We see memory, because a world that remembers how to flood remembers how to live. There is poetry in a dry waterfall, in a place where nothing flows anymore, but everything still points to motion. It reminds us that stillness is not the original state, that even the quietest planets once had voices. Mars had water, had movement, had a moment in time when it roared, and that roar is still there, if you know how to listen. Not with ears, not with sound, but with the kind of listening that happens when you run your eyes across a satellite image and realize the valley you're tracing was once a river, a lake, a sea. When you look at a cliff face and feel the weight of the water that used to fall from it, that's how Mars speaks now. In shapes, in silence, in the memory of motion. The planet didn't forget. It just stopped explaining. There is a silence to Mars that feels ancient, but not untouched, not untouchable. It's the kind of quiet that invites footsteps, that waits for them. For millions of years, the red dust has rested undisturbed, blown into dunes by whispering winds, settled in craters that remember impacts older than anything humanity has ever built. But now, we stand on the edge of something vast and trembling, a future where that dust may hold a new imprint, not from a rover's tire or a robot's drill, but from the sole of a human boot, a weight we've dreamed of placing for generations. We have looked at Mars not as a fantasy, but as a destination, a place we might reach, not through fiction or telescope lenses alone, but through metal, math, and persistence. Artemis has already begun this reach, laying the groundwork by returning us to the moon, not as an endpoint, but as a rehearsal. Starship waits like a cathedral of ambition, a vessel built for crossing the impossible. And behind these machines are hands and hearts and breath, people whose eyes flick upward, not in hope, but in intent. Mars has always felt like a story, the god of war, the red wanderer in the night sky, the imagined home of aliens, canals, and lost civilizations. But it is also just a place, a cold real world with weather and dust and rocks and gravity, waiting. And when the first human steps onto that soil, the moment won't be loud. It won't be broadcast with fanfare that can match its meaning. It will be a crunch in the dust, a breath inside a helmet, a voice saying something quiet, something ordinary, and yet it will echo like thunder through history. Because to stand on another planet is to say something extraordinary about what it means to be human. It is to take everything fragile and strange about life, our blood, our heat, our memory, and carry it across the void, to walk in a place where nothing has ever lived and whisper, "I'm here." The journey won't be easy. Nothing about it is. Mars is far, unforgiving, and uninterested in our survival. Radiation pours down unchecked. The air cannot hold our breath. The soil may hide poisons. The cold will not pity us. But we've survived worse, in smaller ways, in caves, in deserts, in the frozen dark. We are not made for Mars, but we are made to adapt, and that is what will bring us there. The path to Mars is being carved in stages: a launch, a landing, a habitat, a suit. Every piece tested and retested, not just for function, but for the rhythm of life in an alien place. And one day, the rocket will rise not to circle Earth, but to leave it entirely, to arc outward like a thrown stone, aimed not at myth, but at dust. And then comes descent, a world growing in the window, orange and pink and brown, a sky too thin to trust, engines firing, heat blooming against the hull, and then touchdown. A silence so deep, it might feel like time itself is holding its breath. What happens next will feel both historic and mundane. Someone will unbuckle their harness. Someone will check a screen. Someone will step into an airlock. They will not be heroes in the moment. They will be workers, scientists, engineers, people doing a job. But when that airlock opens and the ladder lowers and the first boot presses into the powdery red ground, they will become something else entirely. They will be the answer to a question older than memory. Can we go farther? And now, the answer will be yes. There's something poetic about the fact that Mars, the god of war, may become the first place beyond Earth to hold peaceful human footprints. No battle cry, no conquest, just exploration, just curiosity, just the quiet dignity of presence. To walk on Mars is not to win, but to wonder, to realize fully how small we are and how much that smallness can still reach. Those first explorers will not walk easily. Gravity is strange there. The suits will be stiff. Every step will be cautious, but they will walk. And their steps will stir dust that hasn't moved in 1 billion years. They'll kneel to gather samples, to study the land, to begin learning not through instruments alone, but through touch, through the intimacy of being there. And in the nights that follow, they'll look up and see Earth, a star, a speck, home reduced to a pinprick of blue light, hanging alone in a black sky. And in that moment, Mars won't be just a planet. It will be a mirror, a way to see ourselves not from a map or a memory, but from the outside, from the silence beyond. The presence of humans on Mars will change things. Not the planet, at first, but us. Our sense of time, of possibility, of place. It will stretch the definition of home. It will raise new questions. How do we live here? How do we build here? How do we stay? And somewhere deep in the dust, perhaps, something ancient will stir, not in motion, but in meaning. A world once silent, now watched, now shared. And as the days stretch on, the footprints will multiply, paths will be worn into the dirt, shelters will rise, dust will cling to helmets, to gloves, to tools. And slowly, Mars will stop being the unreachable red dream in the sky and start becoming what it always had the potential to be, a place where someone might one day be born, a place where someone might fall in love, a place not of firsts, but of futures. And long after those first footsteps are covered by wind, the meaning will remain, because the echo of one small step never really fades. It ripples. It continues, especially on a red world that once seemed untouchable. Mars does not speak in absolutes. It doesn't offer the clarity of life or the finality of death. It waits in between, a world held in tension, stretched thin between what it once was and what it might still become. When you look at it from afar, it resembles a graveyard, frozen and red, a planet that once tried to live and then gave up. Its rivers dried, its oceans vanished, its skies stripped bare. The warmth that once hummed beneath its surface faded, and what's left is dust, silence, and the long echo of something unfinished. But that silence isn't empty. It's layered, resonant, like the pause between heartbeats, the kind of quiet that asks questions instead of answering them. Everywhere you look, Mars is telling a half story. Dry riverbeds that remember the rush of water, sediment patterns that hint at tides, magnetic scars in the rock that remember a shielded sky, lakes that may still linger beneath the ice, hidden but not gone. There are no green valleys here, no bird song, no thunder or rainfall. And yet, the planet pulses faintly, as though something beneath the crust hasn't entirely stopped breathing. It's easy to label Mars as dead. The word fits. It's cold, hostile, barren, the kind of place that seems to resist life at every turn. Its atmosphere is too thin to hold warmth, too poisoned to feed lungs. The sun there burns through radiation like an open wound. Nothing grows, nothing moves. And yet, every mission sent to study it returns with whispers of contradiction. Methane bursts that come and go with the seasons, subsurface salts that could cradle water, seismic murmurs that roll through the crust, like dreams stirring in sleep. A world that looks asleep, but twitches at the edges, We have lived so long with the binary of living and dead that we forget about the vast space in between, the wilderness of maybes, the liminal state of a planet that isn't birthing forests or boiling magma, but also isn't entirely still. Mars is that. Not a corpse, not a cradle, something stranger, something in transition. It is a world on pause, not waiting for us, exactly, but not indifferent either. It holds potential like a seed does, dry and dormant, but whole. To stand on Mars is to confront that ambiguity, to feel the crunch of ancient dust beneath your boots and know it hasn't changed in eons, and at the same time, to look at the horizon and feel a presence, not of ghosts, but of possibility. You might dig into the soil and find nothing but minerals, or you might find a fragment of life, a microbe, a fossil, a chemical footprint left by something that lived in the warmth of a subsurface spring a billion years ago. The odds are slim, but not zero, and that sliver is enough to transform the entire planet into a riddle. It is easy to anthropomorphize Mars, to see it as lonely or longing, a sibling world cast aside, a canvas abandoned. But perhaps it's not that. Perhaps Mars doesn't miss anything. Perhaps it simply is. Perhaps it doesn't mourn what it lost, because it never saw it as loss. We are the ones who fill it with meaning. We are the ones who project hope onto its silence, who look at its craters and see questions, not ruins, who stare into its dust storms and wonder if they once smelled of rain. And maybe that's what makes Mars feel alive. Not its biology, but our belief, our insistence that this place matters, that it still holds secrets worth uncovering, that it might still teach us something about survival or failure or the thin line between the two. Maybe Mars is alive in the way a story is alive, in the way a myth endures, not because of what it is, but because of what it stirs in us. There is a humility in facing Mars. It strips you of comfort, of certainty. It makes Earth feel miraculous by contrast. Our breathable air, our flowing water, our soft nights. But it also deepens our curiosity. What are the rules of life, really? How far can it stretch before it snaps? Could it flicker into being in a salty underground pocket, shielded from the cold, the radiation, the violence of time? Could it exist in forms we don't yet understand, forms that leave no fossil, no cell, only a shift in chemistry? And if life once existed here and was extinguished, what does that tell us about the fragility of biology, about the odds we've beaten just to exist? Mars may be our mirror not because it resembles Earth, but because it shows us what Earth might have been, what Earth still could become. A cautionary tale, wrapped in a lullaby of dust. But it's not just a warning, it's also an invitation. Because if we can land there, walk there, build there, and maybe, someday, and thrive there, we prove that life is not a fragile accident but a force. A stubborn, defiant force that moves through the universe seeking cracks to grow in, that will terraform if it has to, that will adapt and build and reach, again and again, across impossible distances, just to begin again in the silence. So perhaps that's what Mars really is. A graveyard, yes, but also a threshold. A place where endings and beginnings blur, where the past still hums faintly under the ice, and where the future may already have roots. It's a planet that teaches us how to wonder differently, not with the loud hope of certainty, but with the quiet awe of not knowing. And in that in-between space, between death and life, between silence and motion, Mars waits.